We often speak of the shadow as an untold wellspring of power, a treasure hidden in the deepest recesses of the human psyche, and there's not an ounce of falsehood in that. But what if this very treasure, once brought into the light, turns out not to be salvation, but an elaborate trap capable of consuming the seeker whole? What if the greatest light you ever discover in your own unconscious abyss proves not to be a guiding star, but a blinding inferno in which both your essence and your world will burn? This is not just a metaphor. It is the harsh reality of a phenomenon known in depth psychology as inflation, a process where the ego identifies itself with powerful, unconscious content. We are taught to accept our shadow, to integrate its repressed aspects, thereby restoring our wholeness. But too little is said about the possibility of not just glimpsing this abyss, but becoming it. Imagine an alchemist who, instead of transmuting lead into gold, turns into a block of this heavy, inert metal himself, frozen in the illusion of newfound power. Or a captain who, believing in his absolute dominion over the ocean, challenges the very elements, dissolving into their boundless expanse, losing both his ship and his very name. Within each of us slumbers a primal, untamed power, capable of both creating worlds and plunging them into chaos. And this is not just about hidden vices or suppressed desires. It's about dormant ambitions, unexpressed rage, the right to make mistakes, unaccepted vulnerability, all those aspects that were once rejected, deemed unworthy, unacceptable, or dangerous. When this colossal energy is unleashed from its chains, there arises an unbearable temptation to consider it one's absolute boundless strength, forgetting about boundaries, about grounding, about the humble but vital role the ego plays in this magnificent dance. This identification, this inflation does not happen by chance. It is rooted in how these bad or dangerous aspects of ourself were formed, how they were exiled to the shadow, and why their return feels so all-consuming. We stand at the headwaters of the river that feeds the shadow, not where it flows as a mighty current, but where once clear streams, cascading from the peaks into the valley of consciousness, were intercepted and diverted into underground channels. Each of us in childhood is like a blank slate on which the world begins to write its rules, its do's and don'ts. And very often in this formative process, what could have been our strength, our unique melody, is declared a dissonance, a dangerous noise that must be silenced. Remember how sometimes childhood dreams of greatness, of flying to the stars, of creating a new world, were met with a condescending smile or even a direct prohibition. Don't get ahead of yourself. Be like everyone else. Who are you to claim that? This thirst for growth, this striving for heights, which could have been a driver of progress, was carefully but persistently packed into the dark closet of shame for pride or excessive demands. Ambitions, this inner fire, were extinguished so as not to disturb the peace of others, not to stand out, not to be too much. Or take healthy aggression, not destructive rage, but that primal force that allows us to assert our boundaries, protect ourselves and our loved ones, to say a firm no. How often was this energy, this natural impulse for self-preservation, for expressing disagreement, for upholding justice, declared improper, rude, bad? Girls don't act like that. Good boys don't get angry. And so instead of being a shield, anger turns into a hidden, ticking time bomb that waits its moment in the subconscious, ready to explode when it's least appropriate or to gnaw at us from within? And what about the right to make mistakes in a world where we were taught from childhood to strive for an ideal, for flawlessness? Any misstep was punished with condemnation, sometimes external, sometimes internal, far more severe. The fear of being imperfect, of being ridiculed, of being rejected drove natural human imperfection into the shadow, forcing us to strive for unattainable perfection while simultaneously paralyzing any forward movement. Similarly, vulnerability, the ability to feel, to experience, to show weakness without shame. Don't cry, be strong, don't be a baby. These phrases, like a hammer, drove out the desire to be open, vulnerable, authentic. For to be vulnerable meant to be weak, and weakness in this system of coordinates was tantamount to defeat. This is how the shadow was formed, not as a repository of evil, but as a prison for everything that was once declared inconvenient, wrong, dangerous for the image we tried to create or that was imposed upon us. Each such expulsion was dictated by the desire for survival, for adaptation in a world that demanded a certain form from us. We learned to hide our true nature to meet the expectations of parents, teachers, society. This process was painful, but it seemed necessary to preserve love, approval, and belonging. Thus, what could have been our unique gift, our inner fire, was chained by shame and fear, turning into something alien, frightening, which now lives in the twilight of the unconscious, gaining power, for suppressed energy never disappears without a trace. It merely changes form, awaiting the moment when it can reassert itself, sometimes quite dramatically. This is everyone's personal story, yet it echoes ancient, universal mechanisms common to all humanity. The universality of the shadow is not a metaphor, but a principle etched into the very structure of the human soul. Each of us, stepping onto the threshold of conscious life, unwittingly becomes a participant in an ancient ritual, expulsion, not external expulsion from the tribe, which threatens physical solitude, but internal expulsion. From the earliest years, under the whispers of parental admonitions, under the pressure of social expectations, we learn to cut off parts of ourselves that seem unacceptable, wrong, or superfluous. Rage that could have been a shield, vulnerability that could have opened the way to true intimacy, ambitions that could have soared to the sky, even the right to make mistakes without which growth is inconceivable. All these, like wild beasts, are exiled beyond the bounds of the civilized self. And we build an invisible but strong fence around our ego so that none of these outcasts can break back in and disturb the fragile peace built on adaptation and the search for approval. However, unlike physical expulsion, where the outcast permanently loses connection with the community, the exiled parts of the psyche do not disappear. They merely go underground into the bottomless depths of the unconscious, where they continue to live their own shadowy lives. And here a second universal law comes into play, the law of the unpaid bill. Psychic energy, like water, cannot simply evaporate. Suppressed, it does not dissolve into nothingness, but accumulates, condenses, and gains strength. Every suppressed desire, every unlived emotion, every rejected aspect of personality is a kind of promissory note that will sooner or later have to be paid. And the interest on this bill grows exponentially. The longer we deny these parts of ourselves, the deeper we push them into oblivion, the more powerful their potential becomes, the stronger their urge for manifestation. The psyche, by its very nature, strives for wholeness, for completeness. What consciousness rejects, the unconscious seeks to reclaim, sometimes in the most unexpected and dramatic ways. This is not just a metaphor, but a fundamental principle observed in every culture, in every era. Just as fertile soil, deprived of access to solar energy, does not die, but merely concentrates hidden resources within itself, so too does the soul. By cutting itself off from its shadowy aspects, not get rid of them, but merely creates internal pressure. This pressure sooner or later breaks through, often in the form of irrational reactions, inexplicable fears, obsessive ideas, or even more dangerously, through projection. What we cannot accept in ourselves, we begin to see and condemn in others with astonishing ease, unleashing upon them all the accumulated inner anger and rejection. And this mechanism generates entire galleries of images that cause irrational aversion in us, as if they embody all our own carefully hidden flaws. The energy, once repressed into the depths of the unconscious, does not dissolve without a trace. It merely changes form, becoming an invisible source of irrational reactions, like an undertow, capable of dragging a ship into a whirlpool. These hidden forces manifest in our projections, in those figures that evoke in us an inexplicable burning hatred or contempt, sometimes disproportionate to the actual circumstances. They are mirrors reflecting something suppressed within ourselves, something we could not or would not accept. Consider the phantom of the tyrant. Within each of us slumbers the shadow of the ruler, that part that craves control, order, and the assertion of its will. When a figure embodying this energy in its distorted, destructive form appears in our field of vision, be it a despotic boss, an unyielding parent, or an abstract image of a political leader, a wave of fury, sometimes bordering on madness, rises within us. This hatred is not merely a reaction to injustice. It is an echo of our own suppressed longing for power over our own lives, for asserting boundaries, for expressing healthy aggression, which was once labeled unacceptable or evil. We hate in the tyrant our own unrealized right to authority, to decisiveness, to the ability to influence the world around us. Or take the specter of the loose woman. Her image evokes not only condemnation, but also a deep, sometimes repulsive aversion that seems disproportionate to her actual actions. She is one who boldly defies social conventions, lives by her own rules, ignoring moral dogmas. In this contempt lies our own fear of freedom, of uncontrolled sensuality, of the right to be vulnerable, or conversely to be absolutely independent of others' opinions. We hate in her what we have forbidden ourselves, the courage to be imperfect, the right to make mistakes, to enjoy without guilt, to express our true, untamed nature, which may have been suppressed by strict boundaries in childhood. No less repulsive might seem the figure of the coward, one who at a critical moment retreats, betrays, avoids confrontation. Our indignation at the sight of such weakness sometimes borders on physical pain. But isn't this pain a reflection of our own fear of showing vulnerability, of admitting our helplessness, or even worse, of realizing that within us too slumbers the capacity for a shameful act for self-preservation? We project onto the coward our own fear of defeat, of pain, of the need to defend ourselves when the stakes are too high. This hatred is a way to wall ourselves off from our own potential weakness, from that part of us that also seeks the easy way out, avoids risk and responsibility. Imagine Andre. He is 40, and his entire life is an undeclared war with his boss, Sergei Petrovich. Sergei Petrovich is a classic tyrant, loud, demanding, intolerant of dissent. Andre hates him with all his heart. Every encounter with him results in a fit of rage he can barely contain. At home, he spends hours describing to his wife what a petty, insignificant despot Sergei Petrovich is. His voice trembles with indignation. His fists clench. But what's curious is that the stronger his hatred, the more powerless and suppressed Andre himself feels. He cannot assert himself at work, is afraid to ask for a raise, and avoids conflicts even in minor matters. His own energy, which he could direct towards self-assertion, healthy boundary setting, and demonstrating leadership qualities, is entirely consumed by fueling this destructive hatred. He drowns in the figure of his tormentor, failing to notice how a part of himself, that which craves power over his own life, was projected onto Sergei Petrovich and then suppressed under the weight of this projection. Andre became a hostage not so much to an external tyrant as to an internal one, whom he allowed to consume his strength. This hatred, this irrational obsession with someone else's evil, is a sure sign that the ego is beginning to lose its footing. It is drowning in the turbulent flow of the unconscious, identifying with what it rejects. When we hate something external so intensely, we are, in essence, fighting a part of ourselves that has been exiled to the shadow. And the stronger the fight, the deeper the immersion. This is precisely that inflation where unconscious content, instead of being integrated, consumes the personality, making it a hostage to its own projections. The person becomes possessed by a demon he himself created from his suppressed possibilities. He doesn't just hate, he becomes this hatred, losing connection with his true essence. But what if behind these repulsive facades, behind these hateful reflections, lies not merely a curse, but a distorted blessing? Not just a source of aversion, but a key to forbidden abilities and rights awaiting their release. Our previous reflections have brought us face to face with the phantoms of our own creation, those distorted reflections born from suppressed energies that we project onto the canvas of the world. Andre, looking at his boss, Sergei Petrovich, saw not just a person, but the embodiment of the tyrant, unaware that it was merely a reflection of his own unrecognized yearning for power and control. Similarly, the fear of the loose woman or contempt for the coward turned out to be nothing more than a shadowy mirror reflecting our own unaccepted aspects, the freedom of sensuality, the right to vulnerability. But if the shadow is not just a prison, but a storehouse, what then lies hidden behind these terrifying guises? What gifts, what forbidden abilities, what inherent rights are concealed within their distorted forms? Every demon we encounter in the nocturnal labyrinth of our psyche is nothing but a distorted image of a divine power locked away in the prison of non-acceptance. Take the tyrant, this archetype that so often evokes repulsion and inner resistance. Behind its rigid mask, behind the urge to dominate, behind the overwhelming will that we are so afraid to express, lies something far nobler and more necessary. This is not a suppressed desire for dictatorship, but the right to self-determination, to set boundaries, to healthy ambition, and the ability to lead. The tyrant, in its pure, undistorted form, is a leader capable of making decisions, taking responsibility, showing initiative, and demonstrating discipline. It is the inner Strength that allows us to assert ourselves in the world, to defend our beliefs, to bring our ideas into reality. It is the energy that drives us toward a goal, gives us the courage to face challenges and overcome obstacles. Accepting this aspect means not becoming a despot, but gaining an inner core, the capacity for true authority. First and foremost, over oneself. It is the right not to be a victim of circumstances, but to be their creator, the master of one's destiny, rather than a puppet of others' expectations. And what about the loose woman, this image burdened by centuries of condemnation and moral prohibitions, which we so diligently push away? Behind it lies something incomparably deeper than mere unbridled sensuality. It is the embodiment of primal life force, spontaneity, the joy of being. It is the right to pleasure, to the fullness of feelings, to creative self-expression without regard for others' judgments. The loose woman is an archetype that symbolizes our connection to nature, to instincts, to the inexhaustible flow of life. It is the ability to dance, sing, create, love without conditions and without fear of being judged. It is liberation from the shackles of rigid social norms that stifle our natural vitality. Accepting this part does not mean descending into a chaos of immorality, but gaining inner freedom, vibrancy, and the ability to experience the world deeply. It is the right to be oneself in all one's fullness, with all one's desires and passions, without feeling shame. It is permission to be alive, to be sensual, to be a source of inspiration and genuine joy, both for oneself and for others. And finally, the coward, a figure so despised in a culture that cultivates the image of an unwavering hero and eternal strength. What lies hidden behind this mask of fear and apparent weakness? It is not merely timidity, but a deep understanding of one's own vulnerability, an acknowledgement of human limitation and fragility. It is the right to make mistakes, to doubt, not to be perfect, to be humble in the face of the incomprehensible. The coward, in its true essence, is our capacity for empathy, for compassion, for genuine humanity. It is the wisdom that allows us to ask for help, to acknowledge our limits, and to learn from our mistakes. Accepting the coward does not mean becoming spineless, but gaining true courage, the courage that allows us to be honest with ourselves, to acknowledge our weaknesses, and to grow through them. It is the right to be human, to be imperfect, to be open to the world and to other people without fear of being rejected. It is permission to feel, to be vulnerable, and precisely in this vulnerability to find a source of strength, deep wisdom, and authentic connection. These demons are not enemies, but distorted messengers. They carry within them the keys to our forbidden abilities, to our inherent rights, the right to be strong and to lead, the right to be free and to feel, the right to be vulnerable and to grow. By rejecting them, we deprive ourselves of these vital resources, condemning ourselves to a life devoid of completeness and authenticity. The irony is that these very suppressed aspects, which we so diligently hide, often turn out to be the very forces that could lead us to success and well-being. But they manifest only in a distorted form, sabotaging our efforts and bringing suffering, sometimes in the most unpredictable ways. We have already spoken of the shadow as a reservoir of power, of its suppressed energy, which is like an unpaid bill that will inevitably present itself. But what is the price of this ignorance? What happens when we persist in our refusal to acknowledge these repressed aspects of ourselves? The answer is simple and harsh. They begin to dictate our destinies, turning life into a series of self-sabotage and involuntary suffering. Take, for example, Andrei, whose hatred for his boss, Sergei Petrovich, was as irrational as it was all-consuming. Andrei saw Sergei Petrovich as the embodiment of tyranny, despotism, and an insatiable desire for absolute control. He complained about injustice, about suppressed initiative, about his talent not being valued, but in reality it was his own deeply suppressed craving for power. Not power over others, but power over his own life, over his own decisions, the right to healthy aggression in asserting his boundaries and ambitions that manifested in this projection. Andrei, taught from childhood to be a good boy, could not allow himself to be decisive, demanding, or even assertive when necessary. He feared judgment, feared being bad. As a result, his career stagnated. He avoided responsibility because responsibility required the expression of that very tyrannical will. He couldn't delegate tasks, couldn't set strict deadlines, couldn't assert his point of view to management. Every time he needed to demonstrate leadership qualities, he retreated, yielded, agreed, and then seethed internally with indignation, projecting his helplessness onto Sergei Petrovich. His life was full of missed opportunities, bitterness, and a sense of injustice, because the inner strength that could have made him the master of his fate was locked away and projected onto an external enemy. Consider another example, Elena, whose life was a model of impeccability. Neat, reserved, always composed, she seemed the embodiment of virtue. But beneath this polished surface seethed a suppressed, loose woman, not necessarily in the literal sense, but as a symbol of primal life force, spontaneity, the right to pleasure without guilt, to the expression of an untamed, creative nature. Elena was deprived of the capacity for true joy, for carefree laughter, for the free expression of feelings. Her relationships were sterile, devoid of passion, because she was afraid to be too much, afraid to be wrong. She condemned others for frivolity, for excessive emotionality, seeing in them what she could not accept in herself. Her life turned into a series of duties, devoid of inspiration, and her body, deprived of freedom of expression, reacted with psychosomatic ailments, as if screaming about suppressed life energy that found no healthy outlet. Every time she wanted to take a risk, try something new, or surrender to an impulse, an internal censor born from the suppressed, loose woman whispered, "That's improper. That's dangerous. You'll lose control." And she retreated, leaving behind only a taste of regret and a growing emptiness. Or take Maxim, who prided himself on his unbreakable courage and never showed fear. He was the one who always pushed forward without thinking of the consequences, who took on the riskiest tasks. But behind this bravado lay a suppressed coward, not the capacity for faint-heartedness, but the fear of vulnerability, of admitting his own weakness, of the possibility of defeat. Maxim could not ask for help, could not admit a mistake, could not allow himself to be imperfect. He avoided deep emotional connections because they required openness and a willingness to be vulnerable. His life was a series of lonely victories, followed by periods of deep exhaustion and alienation. He made reckless decisions, refused vital negotiations, because admitting his incompetence or the need for compromise seemed to him a sign of weakness. His courage was merely a mask behind which lay a deep fear of being rejected, and his true strength, the ability to be humble, empathetic, truly courageous in being honest with himself, remained undeveloped, condemning him to constant internal tension and an inability for genuine intimacy. Someone might object, why dig up the past? Why delve into these unpleasant aspects of myself? Isn't it better to just move on, ignoring what causes pain? And that is a legitimate question. But the fact is, ignoring is not a solution, but merely a postponement. The pain you experience, the failures you encounter, the recurring scenarios in which you find yourself a victim or an aggressor, these are all voices of your shadow demanding attention. This is not a whim, not bad luck, but a signal that within you are powerful yet unintegrated forces that, when rejected, manifest destructively. They do not manifest from outside, but through you, through your reactions, your choices, your fears. And until you acknowledge them, until you give them the right to exist, they will continue to dictate the terms of your life, depriving you of freedom and fullness of being. Sometimes, however, the shadow manifests in a completely different paradoxical way, not through what we reject and hate in others, but through what we admire, what we exalt, and what we believe lies beyond our own capabilities. We have already delved into the darkest corners of the psyche, where rejected aspects of ourself hide, shadows casting long, distorted silhouettes onto the canvas of our lives. We have spoken of rage seeking an outlet, of fear that paralyzes, of suppressed ambitions whispering from the subconscious. But the shadow, like the moon, has not only an unlit side facing the abyss, it also has a shining face full of unrealized greatness, what Carl Jung called the golden shadow. This phenomenon is as deceptive as it is beautiful. If the negative shadow manifests in what we despise or reject in others, the golden shadow reveals itself in what evokes immense admiration in us. Imagine a person whose charisma fills a room, whose words flow like a river of wisdom, whose creative power seems inexhaustible, or one whose inner strength and determination can move mountains, and whose compassion embraces the world. We look at them with reverence, put them on pedestals, make idols of them, unconsciously projecting onto them our own as yet unrevealed, unaccepted talents and abilities. Every time we exclaim, "How does he do that? I wish I could," or "She's just a genius. I'm nowhere near that," we commit the subtlest act of self-sabotage. We voluntarily alienate a part of our soul, attributing it to another, as if giving away the golden dust of our inner treasures. We see something magnificent, but instead of recognizing it as potential within ourselves, we turn it into something external, unattainable, a privilege of the chosen few. This is not mere admiration. It is a projection that deprives us of our own power and authentic identity. We often become passive observers of our own unrevealed greatness, bestowing our crowns upon those we idolize. Paradoxically, this leads to a state of psychological inflation, not from an excessive ego, but from its severe impoverishment. The idols filling our inner pantheons are often mere mirrors, reflecting what we ourselves fear or hesitate to express. Behind every genius we applaud, our own suppressed creativity may be yearning for an outlet. Behind every leader we are ready to follow, our own unrealized capacity to lead and make decisions might be hidden. Behind every sage whose words we hang on, our own unspoken wisdom may lie. awaiting its moment. We gift them our talents, our ambitions, our courage, our brightest and most powerful qualities, leaving ourselves stranded in the ordinary, trapped by a sense of our own mediocrity and powerlessness. This is a subtle yet destructive misconception. For as long as we continue to project these golden sparks onto others, they remain out of our reach, encased within the achievements of others. We can drown in the unconscious not only by identifying with the negative shadow, becoming a tyrant or victim. We can also drown in powerlessness and apathy if we do not reclaim our own treasures, which we have bestowed upon external idols. This is not merely about lacking something, it's about voluntarily relinquishing what we already possess, our wholeness, our authentic potential. Understanding this mechanism is the first step towards reclaiming our integrity and attaining true power. This is a call to view those we admire not as unattainable ideals, but as living reflections of our own dormant greatness. It is an invitation to deep self-analysis, to reevaluate what we value and why. The key to our most profound gifts often lies not in what we hate and reject, but in what we love and exalt too much in others, unaware that it is our own treasure waiting to be discovered and integrated into our conscious life. And for this, there are indeed concrete paths. We've discussed inflation, how the ego, absorbed by the shadow's content, risks dissolving, drowning in the boundless waters of the unconscious. This is more than a metaphor. It's a state where an individual loses their boundaries, ceases to be themselves, becoming a vessel for undifferentiated, sometimes destructive impulses. The goal of our exploration is not to suppress the shadow, nor to banish it to the dark corners of the psyche, but to integrate it. But how do we integrate what seems monstrous or conversely impossibly perfect without losing ourselves in the process? The answer lies in a new philosophy of interacting with this inner reality. Imagine the ego not as a fragile bastion defending against the onslaught of the unconscious, but as a skilled helmsman capable of navigating the vessel of the soul even through stormy waters. This is not escape or surrender, but conscious, sovereign navigation. Our task is to transform the wild, unexamined energies of the shadow into fertile ground for personal growth, a source of true strength and authenticity. This new philosophy asserts the shadow is not an enemy, but a forgotten ally whose energy is essential for the fullness of being. True wisdom lies not in destroying darkness, but in learning to illuminate it, transform it, and engage it in conscious life. For this transformation, we will need a simple yet profound tool, which I will call the mirror of integration. It is not a mystical ritual, but an exercise requiring only sincerity and inner discipline. Begin with observation. Recall a person, whether an acquaintance or a character from a book or film, who evokes extremely strong, almost irrational emotions in you. This could be burning aversion, disgust, envy, or conversely boundless admiration bordering on deification. Write down their name and the qualities that so strongly resonate with you. This is the first step, the discovery of projection, the very mechanism through which the shadow manifests externally. Now, instead of staying external, turn your gaze inward. Ask yourself, which of these qualities that I project so strongly actually lives within me? Where have I suppressed it out of fear of judgment? Or where does it manifest in my life unconsciously in a distorted way? If you hate a tyrant, ask yourself where within you resides the need for control, for strength, for asserting your boundaries. If you deify a genius, ask where your own unrevealed talents, your dormant creativity lie. This does not mean you must become a tyrant or a genius. It means you acknowledge the presence of these potentials within yourself. The next step is conscious recultivation. Imagine that this quality you found within is a seed that has long lain in the ground. How could you cultivate it? How could you consciously and constructively integrate this aspect of the shadow into your life? Perhaps you will allow yourself to be more assertive where you used to remain silent, or begin developing a long forgotten hobby, giving an outlet to creative energy. Write down exactly how you intend to do this, what specific steps you will take. This is not about justifying destructive manifestations, but about appropriating the energy behind them and directing it into a constructive channel. And finally, the most important element, grounding. After any deep dive into the unconscious, whether through dreams, meditation, or a similar exercise, it is crucially important to return to reality. Feel your body, your feet on the ground. Take a few deep breaths. Feel the texture of objects around you. Hear the sounds of the world. Grounding is an anchor for the ego, preventing it from dissolving into the depths that have opened up. It confirms your identity, your wholeness, your ability to be a conscious observer and integrator. This process is not a one-time action, but a continuous practice, a dialogue between the conscious and the unconscious. Each time you recognize and integrate a fragment of the shadow, you expand the boundaries of your consciousness, gaining greater wholeness and true unwavering strength. This is the path to gaining genuine power over your own destiny, freedom from the invisible threads by which the shadow has controlled your life. And when we learn to see in the shadow not only personal challenges, but also universal patterns, we can look even deeper. Beyond the personal shadow lie collective shadows, and beyond them, archetypal forms that shape not only our personal history, but also the great myths of humanity.